Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About It. This is Susan Johnson, and I'm here with my co-host, Dennis O'Brien, and have we got a great show for you this evening. It's going to be all about housing. Right, Dennis?
That's what you told me.
Yes, indeed. And I have to say, I'm very, very fortunate. At the Capitol, here I am, I met Alex, and he is from the Pew Charitable Trust, and he came at the request of the mayor of Hartford, Aruna Narayanan, and he presented a lot of information on housing on the national level. And so what we're going to do is do a little talk about housing, what's going on nationally, and maybe some of the things that we might be able to, deal with here on the local level, perhaps. So we do have a big housing bill that's coming up. Our majority leader, Jason Rojas, Representative Rojas, has got a large housing bill, and it's something that, I'm going to take a look and see what we have to say today and see how that might help the housing bill that will be presented next week. So I'm just so glad to have Alex Horowitz here with us, and any remarks, Dennis?
Any remarks? I got a lot to say, yeah, but I don't know if I'll save them for later. But Susan and I don't get a chance to talk very much because we're doing separate things. And I know you were at the Capitol, Alex. I know that there's a great, big, beautiful housing bill. I got to say that.
That's very good, Dennis.
But yeah, right. But I don't know much about it. I know that it will be very, very difficult to get meaningful housing legislation passed through the Connecticut legislature. We can talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to know did Alex speak to the entire legislature?
No, it was a group that was invited the whole legislature was invited, but only if people could come, based on what they had for time availability.
Sure. So how many people did you speak to, Alex? Roughly?
I think we had about 30 folks in the room.
Oh, that's pretty good.
A mix of state and local officials and others who are working on housing and who are interested. So it was great to have a good turnout and a lot of engagement, a lot of questions.
Can you tell us a little bit about the group you're with, the Pew Charitable Trust?
Sure. The Pew Charitable Trust is a nonprofit organization. It's a nonpartisan organization. It does research and policy work in the public interest. And so we study the issues that can inform policymaking and can help contribute knowledge so that we can be successful and help policymakers and society achieve its goals. And housing is one of those issues because the housing shortage has gotten so severe that housing costs have reached an all-time high.
Absolutely. And Alex, could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in housing and working for Pew Charitable Trust?
Sure. I was at Pew working on housing finance issues before I started working on the housing shortage and housing supply issues because we see that it's gotten tougher to get a mortgage. And that means that people are locked out of becoming first-time home buyers, even if their mortgage payment would be lower than their rent. And so we see people using alternative financing arrangements like rent-to-own agreements, contracts for deed, personal property loans to buy manufactured homes, when most of them would be better off with a mortgage and can handle a mortgage, but it's gotten really difficult to obtain that mortgage, especially for smaller amounts. And in part of doing that work, we saw that the housing shortage was also making it more difficult for people to break into homeownership, to afford their rent, and to be able to afford a home in an area that offered opportunity to them.
Well, you probably know this, Alex, but for a relatively wealthy state, Connecticut has one of the worst situations of all in terms of shortage of affordable housing. And it's because of the structure of Connecticut in terms of the 169 towns, 200 school districts, and a very small, relatively small state, and the way the way it's structured. And plus, we do not have a really large city in our state like Massachusetts does, and I think we're distinguished from Massachusetts by that factor. They have, of course, Boston, and even Worcester is a lot larger than any other city we have. And I'm of the opinion, having worked in housing and in legal aid for a long time, years ago, I'm of the opinion that not having a large city in our state impacts us quite a bit. I don't know if you got much feedback from the group of 30 that you spoke to, but it is very, very, very hard to make changes in Connecticut. We're known as the land of steady habits for a good cause. Anyway, I'll stop with that for now.
Well, so change can come at the local level or it can come at the state level. And for a long time, decisions about whether to allow enough homes for everyone and what sorts of homes to allow were really made exclusively at the local level. But the underlying authority over land use sits at the state level. So from 2012 to 2016, all states in the U.S. combined passed an average of one law a year to allow more homes, to make it easier to build homes. From 2017 to 2022, states passed an average total of 18 laws a year to make it easier to build more homes. In 2023 and 2024, states passed an average of 48 laws a year to make it easier to build more homes. And I think we're on track to break that record in 2025 because we absolutely see that the housing shortage in the U.S., which is estimated at about 4 to 7 million homes, has become such a major salient issue that we're seeing states tackle it. And so that is states that are more rural in nature, such as Montana and Vermont. It's also states that have a lot of big cities in them, like California or Texas or Florida, and it's states that are somewhere in between, like Colorado, Arizona, Washington, or Utah.
I doubt, I don't know what the figures are, and I'm really impressed by what you just said, but I doubt that Connecticut is keeping up with the national trend in that regard, simply because of the way it's structured. We don't have an awful lot of developable land. We do have it, but it's mostly in the suburb. It's not in the cities. It's in the suburbs. Our cities are small, and small area-wise, and they cram a lot of people into a very small space. And the developable land tends to be in the suburban and ex-urban towns, and we haven't come a long way in terms of our legislature. I don't think, anyway, making changes that would permit more development in the more suburban towns. We have a problem with a term that you, I'm sure, have heard: NIMBY, not in my backyard. We have a real bad case of that in Connecticut.
So in a state like Connecticut, look, at this point, Connecticut is a little bit of an outlier. So I should acknowledge that up front. Connecticut's an outlier in a few different ways. One of them is that rents in Connecticut have risen more rapidly than in the U.S. overall. So we go back to 2017, the median rent in Connecticut was about 12% more than the U.S. median rent. But as of this spring, the median rent in Connecticut is 22% above the U.S. median. So rents are rising fast throughout the U.S., and they have been. But in Connecticut, rents have risen faster. So the median rent's almost $1,700 a month now in the state, while the U.S. median is just under $1,400. So what's going on? How did we get there? Well, if we go back to 2017, we see that the rental availability rate was 9% in the spring of 2017. By the spring of 2025, it was only 5.8%. So that means more than a third of the available rentals are no longer available in Connecticut. And the main reason for that is that Connecticut's level of housing production is far below the U.S. average. Connecticut actually ranks 49th out of the 50 states in permitting new housing. And that explains most of why housing has gotten so expensive in Connecticut, because the level of housing production has been so low. And with inventory down in Connecticut 70% to buy since 2018, the median cost of a home has shot up 64% during that time period. And when housing gets that expensive, it puts people in a very precarious situation. It makes it hard to break into home ownership, But also, half of renters in Connecticut are spending more than 30% of income on rent. 29% of renters in Connecticut are spending more than 50% of income on rent. When people are spending more than 50% of income on rent, that puts them at risk of eviction, displacement, crowding, and homelessness. So that's the situation Connecticut sits in today.
Well, you've got it down pretty good. I'm not surprised by anything you said. And anyway, Susan wants to chime in.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's really, really great information. And as one of the towns here in Windham that I represent, we have 3 homeless shelters, but none of the surrounding towns have homeless shelters at all. And so a lot of the urban areas take up the slack, so to speak, for the suburban towns and the rural towns. And we do the work, yet we don't get compensated for the work that we do for the whole state. And we are told, well, you got to watch out for those fiscal guardrails. But when the fiscal guardrails actually shift the cost from the state to the poorest towns in the state. I wondered if any of your discussion had focused on the fact that we have an increase in homelessness.
Absolutely. And homelessness in the U.S. hit an all-time high in 2024, with more than 770,000 people counted as homeless. So the homelessness rate in the U.S. has been going up, and it broke a record in 2023. It broke another record in 2024. And we see that housing costs are far and away the strongest predictor of homelessness. So in cities and in states where rents go up, homelessness tends to go up in tandem. In places that get rent growth under control, homelessness tends to decline. So if we look at cities that have reformed their land use policies and made it easier to build housing, especially apartments on commercial corridors or near transit stops, such as Minneapolis, such as Raleigh, North Carolina, such as Austin, Texas. Houston has made it easier to build by reforming some of their rules and allowing homes on smaller lots. In all 4 of those cities, we've seen homelessness decline because they've gotten rent growth under control. In Minneapolis, that city is in its 9th year without rent increases. Rents today in Minneapolis are the same as they were at the start of 2017 because they've been producing housing at triple the rate of the rest of Minnesota. And I know we mentioned earlier in the call that it feels like some parts of Connecticut are built out or there isn't room for housing. The population density of Connecticut is under 750 people per square mile. The population density of Minneapolis is over 10,000 people per square mile. But Minneapolis is producing far more housing than Connecticut is because they've made it easy to build apartments.
Minneapolis, though, is a large city, a cosmopolitan city. With what has happened in our state, Alex is that racial and economic segregation has limited the people, low-income people, to the cities, and there's not an awful lot of people living in the cities anymore that have a lot of much money. So there's not an awful lot of there's not an awful lot of opportunity to build housing in the cities, and frankly, what we need to do is we need to build more housing in the suburban towns. And we have a town next to us called Lebanon, Connecticut, and it extends from here in Willimantic, which is about 10 miles south of the University of Connecticut, all the way to a town called Colchester, which is actually in New Haven County. It's a big, big town. And I read the Chronicle, the Willimantic Chronicle one day, which is our local newspaper. There was a big headline that said, "Apartment fire in Lebanon." And I said to myself, there are apartments in Lebanon? I mean, that's how bad it is. I mean, they won't allow any apartments at all anywhere. And obviously, a lot of what you're saying is about supply and demand, no question. You got to have a decent supply, and you get a lower rents. You'll get lower cost for buying a first home. But that's the problem we're in, and in the the state of Connecticut is not capable so far, has not been capable, and I want to learn more about this great big, beautiful housing bill. I don't know that much about it, but I heard it's been criticized by a lot of legislators, and it's being watered down, from what I understand. Now, I don't know. Susan knows more about it than I do, so I'll let her talk about it. But it is a tough situation. In fact, Alex, with your expertise, and if I had any the kind of power or authority I wish I had, I'd love to talk to the Pew Group about assigning you to Connecticut full time, because we certainly could use your expertise working hand in hand with lawyers and legislators like ourselves and others to try to address this situation, because it is a difficult, really difficult road to hoe politically.
I'll just add to that, and that is the big, beautiful bill for housing that Representative Rojas has been working so hard on for the last several years. Does have a one aspect of it is to ban the towns from limiting access to the creation of multiple housing units, apartment buildings, and so that's one of the pieces of that legislation. And of course, the Connecticut Conference for Municipalities, the smaller group, what's the name of the smaller group for representing cost, the Council for
Small
Towns all came out against the bill because they said it's going in the way of the zoning rules. But the change in the zoning rules really is very, very minimal. To just say to a town, yeah, you can't prohibit the building of multiple unit housing complexes is minimal, because they're going to have to meet all the housing code and building code requirements, inland wetland requirements. They're going to have to meet, whatever they can get for water, sewer. All those things will have to be addressed. So it's not like it's going to change anything, and they'll have to find a spot for it in the town somewhere that works. But there are a multitude of things where you talked about the idea of developing more housing around transit areas. Well, I think that when I take a look at transit areas here in my district, or we have very limited transit. So our transit authority only goes from Mansfield to Wyndham. It doesn't go really, and the Mansfield one does go to Hartford. But people will have to travel up to Mansfield in order to go to Hartford from utilizing the transit districts. So the transit districts really need to be state organized. They're not. They're more regionally organized, more district organized. They're not really at the point where you can go from one thing to the next in an easy way and get to, say, Hartford in less than 2 or 3 hours. So, and it's a 40-minute ride. So it's really something that we haven't really taken a look at. Now, when you go to Western Connecticut, Southwestern Connecticut, the transit districts are much more. People can utilize them more. So it is more. They're more functional than they are out here in Eastern Connecticut.
Well, most of the wealth in Connecticut, which is considered to be a wealthy state, you probably know, is situated in the western part of the state, not in the eastern part.
So with something like transit, we see that there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, because transit works best when a lot of people live near it. And so having apartment buildings, having townhouses, having homes on smaller lots of any kind, that can mean that you have more people living near transit stops. And the people who use transit the most are the people who live near it. So when we surveyed the public about the idea of allowing apartments near train or bus stations or major job centers, that had 80% support from the public. So policies like this are overwhelmingly popular, but people are much more interested in outcomes than they are in process. And so the public is pretty adamant that housing affordability is a major concern, and that makes sense, because housing is the single biggest item in a family's budget. And with half of renters spending more than 30% of income on rent, It's really never been more expensive to rent a home in the U.S., but it's also never been more expensive to buy a home in the U.S. Historically, home prices were about 3 to 3.5 years of income. So if someone lives in an area where the median income is $80,000, that would translate to a median home price of, say, $240,000 to $280,000. These days, the median home price typically is between 5 and 5.5 years of income. So it's gotten much, much more expensive to buy a home. And the reason why is because so much less housing is being produced than was historically the case. The major reasons are restrictive zoning codes, restrictive building codes, and restrictive permitting processes. Permitting can be a quick process, especially if housing is allowed by right. And that means there's a clear set of rules, and builders know what's expected. And if they submit an application to build housing that complies with the rules, it will be stamped approved. And so the jurisdictions that have improved housing affordability the most have made the construction of apartments a by right use, typically either in downtowns, on commercial corridors, or near transit. So it's not all about transit. The reason why Montana is having some success is because they've made it much easier to build different forms of housing, including apartments. And it's not because their public transit is so robust. It's because they're allowing apartments on commercially zoned land. Florida also, their public transit for the most part isn't so robust, but they're allowing housing on commercially zoned land. In jurisdictions like New Rochelle, New York, or Tysons, Virginia, Portland, Oregon, that are having some success with improving housing affordability and slowing rent growth, what they've made it easier to do is just kind of know what the rules are, and then builders can follow them. And so apartment buildings come online much faster. And this is why they've sharply slowed rent growth, even while housing affordability has worsened in a state like Connecticut.
That is absolutely fabulous, and I think that one of the things that I have wondered about for some time, and many of my colleagues wonder about it, is, why are we not utilizing empty commercial buildings? Why are we not utilizing state-owned empty buildings? These kinds of things should be made available based on state code, and I think that if we were able to go ahead and build housing in these areas where we have empty buildings on our main streets, because we do have a limitation here in Connecticut called the State Historic Preservation Office, and if you are in a city where you have a historic zone, then a lot of people get involved in the process of the housing building to make sure it meets every single standard of historic building based on how it used to be 100 years ago. So one of the things I wondered if you would run into anything about historic districts in some of these areas where you also have transit opportunities and building opportunities.
That's come up, absolutely. And so there are buildings that have a historic designation, but typically the historic designation is really more about the facade of the building than the inside. And so what's holding back using buildings and converting them from a commercial use or office space, because our office vacancy rate is at an all-time high in the U.S. It's over 20% now. We've got over 1 billion square feet of vacant office space. But converting offices into apartments has been tricky. Part of why it's been tricky is moving the plumbing from where it is in an office building, typically in the center of the floor, and then spreading out the plumbing and putting it in every single unit has been a major cost. Another issue has been swapping out windows, because office buildings built after air conditioning became widespread after World War II, most of those office buildings have windows that are fixed. They're not operable. But we've been working with the architecture firm Gensler on a model where instead of converting vacant offices into regular apartments, which we know is expensive and is often over $400 per square foot in construction costs, is instead converting them into dorm-style housing. Those could be actual dorms for college students, graduate students, or they could be dorm-style housing for people who are not in college or at universities. And in the middle of the 20th century, in major cities in the U.S., single-room occupancy housing, so essentially what were then kind of dingy, small dorm-style rooms, they were about a tenth of the rental housing stock in major cities. And those were largely lost from really the 1960s to the 1980s. And once they were, homelessness took off. The U.S. had almost no homelessness as recently as the mid-1970s because low-cost housing of that type was prevalent. And so the model that we're looking at for reviving dorm-style housing, but in a modern, safe, clean way that's up to code, would involve converting commercial spaces into essentially contemporary dorms. This could be a good fit for flight attendants, for people who work at hospitals, for early career workers or lower paid workers who work in healthcare systems or in school systems, because 63% of households in the U.S. only have one or two people in them. But the vast majority of our housing stock is single family. Only about a quarter of our homes in the U.S. are multifamily, are apartments. Even though 63% of households have one or two people, when we're looking at renters, it's 40% of renter households have one person, but homes have gotten bigger over time, even though households have gotten smaller.
Absolutely, and that is a very, very interesting, the dorm-style housing is an interesting concept. It kind of dovetails with an idea that I've had, especially for senior citizens, that would be for seniors or people with disabilities to be able to avail themselves of more rest home capacity, which would, could be utilized in a way that's a dorm-style building. And sometimes they do share the bathrooms, I think, but they also share meals, and they have these things provided to them. They have to be able to function on their own, but a lot of the cleaning and a lot of the responsibility for meals, and they can even have home care services at the rest homes. People at rest homes also have their own cars. In this area here in Eastern Connecticut. So it's really an interesting idea, and I've been hoping for more availability of rest home capacity for seniors who now we're seeing a very big increase in senior citizen homelessness in the state of Connecticut.
So for seniors, especially who are on fixed incomes, co-living could be a good solution because there's a social element to it. It can be an elevated building so that people don't have to deal with stairs. And we see real opportunities for people to end up with housing that fits within their budget so that their budget is not so strained. In our research, we're estimating that rents for co-living units from converted office buildings would clock in around half of the median income in a given city. So, for example, in a city that we looked at like Denver, where the median rent is over $1,700, we were estimating that the median rent for one of these units would be about $850 a month, including utilities. In a city like Seattle, where the median rent is over $2,000, we were estimating that for a co-living unit, we'd be looking at about $1,000 a month, again, including utilities. This would really be energy-efficient housing also. Reusing a building cuts its carbon impact by about 50 to 75% because you're not demolishing a building and then rebuilding a new one. And multifamily housing is safer than single-family housing when it comes to issues like fires, but also it's much more energy efficient. It uses less electricity. People use less water in multifamily housing than they do in single-family housing. And it can enable people to live close to jobs, close to transit stops, close to stores, so they're less dependent on needing to drive everywhere. And that can be especially useful as they age.
Well, you mentioned Seattle, and Dennis and I were in Seattle last June, and when I was talking to some of the people in the hotel we stayed in, I was interested to find out that they had doctors and lawyers living in the hotel because it was convenient to their downtown offices. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily that they had another place to live outside of the city, but when doctors and lawyers first start working in that area where their offices are, they have a tendency to stay in the hotels that are, they have living spaces and recreational gyms, pools, all that. So it's a great opportunity, especially for newly married people or for people just starting off their careers. And that was something I was surprised to see. I hadn't seen that before.
Hotel living used to be much more common in the U.S., and the advantages of it are significant. Look, it's not for everybody, but the idea is to give people more options so they can make choices that are right for them. And depending on how much space they want, how much housework they want to do, how often they're going to cook for themselves, that can make sense. The Vice President of the United States used to live in a hotel room while serving as Vice President, and it was just much more common for people to have additional flexibility before their choices were limited by restrictive zoning codes, restrictive building codes, and uses that became much more limited where types of buildings were separated throughout cities and throughout regions. But we can see that if co-living came back, we would absolutely expect to see a meaningful decline in homelessness. And the reason isn't because this would necessarily be housing for people coming directly off the street, but because losing the bottom rung on the housing ladder led to a lot more homelessness. And anything that brings down rents will necessarily bring down homelessness too, because they move in tandem with each other. And we can see that in jurisdictions that have added a lot of housing, that has quickly improved affordability, and it's mostly apartments, because the scarcity of housing leads to increased competition for every unit, and that drives up rents, and that drives up prices. Right now in the U.S., we've been in a long-term seller's market because there just haven't been enough homes to buy since we're not producing enough. And we've also been in a long-term landlord's market because when there aren't many rentals out there, tenants don't have choices, and that means landlords can raise rents. When there's a lot more rental availability, then tenants have options. Since Austin's apartment boom took off and they made it so much easier to build there, inflation-adjusted rents in Austin are down 24% since the summer of 2022 because tenants have so many options that landlords are cutting rents when they renew leases.
Well, the private equity firms kind of have been buying up properties. For example, here in my district, we have Mobile Home Park, and they have a private equity firm, the same one that owns almost all the mobile homes in this country now, purchased those homes, and they have been raising the rent of the little tiny piece of land that the mobile home sits on, and they are not doing the work they're supposed to do in accordance with their lease. So I just wondered, is private equity buying up all these properties and raising the rents, changing what the market value is, and access to resources for people who are renting?
So institutional investors own roughly 0.7% of single-family homes in the U.S. So overall, it doesn't look like that's a primary explanation for why housing has gotten so expensive, because there are institutional investors who own homes in Austin, where rents are going down, in Minneapolis, where rents haven't risen in 9 years, in Raleigh, where rental affordability has improved quite a lot. For manufactured housing specifically, because we're not seeing a lot of manufactured housing communities get added, that means that the ones that are out there have become a scarce commodity, where people who can't afford other homes have turned to manufactured homes because they cost less. Now, manufactured housing is for new buildings is of similar quality to site-built housing, but there are often restrictions on where it can be located, whether those are design requirements, minimum home sizes, minimum lot sizes that make manufactured housing infeasible to use. And because new manufactured housing can't be produced, that communities can't be produced because of often restrictive zoning, that means that we're creating landlords' markets because you can't get those new communities online since they've been limited by land use rules. And so that gives landlords a lot of power in the manufactured home communities that already exist, since people don't have somewhere else that they can move.
Yeah, that's something that we're really very concerned about here. And we have a program here in the state of Connecticut that deals with rental oversight. And the rental oversight has to do with whether or not the landlord's in compliance with the lease and those kinds of things. And so those rental programs are required for towns with a population of more than 25,000 people. We do have that now, but the rules with those rental oversight programs are actually a little bit less involved than what they might need to be for mobile home parks.
Well, people are in a precarious situation if they own the home and not the land under the home, because the home very likely is the biggest asset that they own. But then if they don't own the land and the rent goes up for the land, that puts them in a difficult situation. The best solution here is for people to be able to get a mortgage where they own the home and they own the land under the home as well. Mortgages tend to have lower interest rates than personal property loans, which are only for the home itself. But titling laws have made that difficult because manufactured homes are usually titled as personal property, and that means it's tough to get a mortgage. Now, New Hampshire is a different story because they title manufactured homes as real estate, and so mortgages are available, and that puts consumers in a better position because being able to get a mortgage leads to stronger consumer protections as well as cost savings through lower interest rates.
Well, that's fascinating, and that's just a state law?
That's a state law.
So we could change the law and make the mobile homes real estate property as opposed to like a car?
Yeah, New Hampshire's done that. There's nothing stopping states from titling manufactured homes as real estate, and that can lead to real consumer savings and stronger consumer protections too, because then the household gets the protections of the eviction process. They also usually get a longer loan term, and that of 30 years, and that means that their monthly payment is lower as well, so it fits in their budget better.
So if you say we changed the law and we made the mobile homes real estate, but they still sit on property that's owned by these big conglomerates, how would that work? Have you seen that?
Yeah, that's a little trickier because you've got one party owning the land and one party owning the home. So this is really more likely to be about situations where a consumer owns the land and the home, but it improves their ability to get a mortgage on it. But being able to get a mortgage is in and of itself beneficial because the interest rates are simply lower usually for mortgages, and the term is longer at 30 years, bringing that payment down. But ultimately, there are so few manufactured home communities left that landlords tend to be in a strong position because tenants have so few options since new manufactured home communities aren't being created since restrictive land use policies have limited where they can be.
Yeah, the rental controller, we also know as the fair rent commissions. Those are the kinds of things where people can go and make complaints about the fact that these the owners of the land where the mobile home sits are not in compliance with the leases, and they are increasing the cost of these places. So it's very, very interesting to me to think that there might be a way to do that. And we're running down to our last 2 minutes, and I have so many more questions, but I do appreciate all the information you provided to us. So why don't you give us a little bit of a summary that maybe our listeners can think about as we move through the bill that we're going to try and get through this year to help out with accessing the increase in home, apartment access, multifamily dwelling access, all types of different housing access.
Sure. So at its core, the reason why rents are the most expensive they've ever been, the reason why home prices are the most expensive they've ever been, the reason why homelessness is the highest that it's ever been, is because of the housing shortage. And the housing shortage is the reason for all of these problems that we're experiencing. It also really limits economic opportunity by restricting whether people can live near the place where they can earn the most or where they can have the job that brings them the most satisfaction. Because in states like Connecticut that are building so little housing, with Connecticut ranking 49th in the country in home permitting, that means that we're inevitably seeing displacement and people moving to parts of the country where they can afford homes. The story of the 20th century was really people moving to opportunity, and the story of the 21st century has so far been people moving away from high housing costs. But there's another way, which is when we see jurisdictions and states that have enacted policies to allow more homes, most crucially allowing apartments on commercial corridors and near transit stops, it has worked. And so in those places, affordability is improving, and the opportunity to buy homes can improve as well. Once Houston began allowing townhouses on small lots, they got about 80,000 of them, but also those homes cost almost 40% less than single-family detached homes. And apartments simply cost less than houses in most cases, so just having them come into the mix improves affordability in and of itself because they simply cost less, but they also give people more options so that existing homes don't get bid up through cutthroat competition when there are so many buyers trying to buy each home or so many renters trying to sign a lease for each available rental.
Thank you so much, Alex Horowitz from the Pew Charitable Trust. Specialty is housing. I can't say how much we appreciate you coming on to Let's Talk About It, and we hope that you're going to come back and tell us some more information about what we can do in Connecticut to make sure we limit our homelessness and we create more access to housing for the people here in the state. Thank you so much for your work and for being with us this afternoon.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.